So this is a small group that I'm suspecting will grow over time. But if you move towards the front, I'm going to let people that are sitting towards the front have books to look at. So, you know, it's an incentive if you'd like to move towards the front. So I am going to be talking to you about sort of basic strategies that can set programs up for success for inclusive practice. And one of the things that I think I hear a lot is inclusion does not work. So this is how we came up with the title, Inclusion Works. That really that it's on us to make inclusion work. So we will talk a little bit about how we have to work as programs to set this up for success. And I do direct several projects, and I want to introduce you to, oh, this is, by the way, on the website, and you can use this, and you can train on Inclusion Works yourself if you download, and it has good information. But I want to talk about the Map to Inclusion and Belonging, which is where this is housed. So the Map to Inclusion and Belonging is funded by the Child Development Division. Oh, I didn't change it. The Early Education and Support Division. See, I have to get that one updated online. With quality improvement funds, and it started in 1998. There was a national effort to look at how can we make inclusion more available so that there's a map that can help families access inclusion. So several states participated. California was one of them. There are about 3 or 4 states that have sort of kept it going, and California is among them. And basically, we are really geared to being your one-stop resource for everything about inclusive practice from birth through 22. So how many of you have visited the Map to Inclusion and Belonging website? Raise your hands. Oh, very nice. And all you out there in the hinterland, I'm sure you have too. It is a site that is regularly updated, and Carolyn, our contract monitor, gets to preview everything and approve everything. And we are always actively seeking approval for new and exciting ideas and finding out what you in the field want. So we have a large number of early educators, early care and education providers, early interventionists, early childhood special educators, school age folks from both special education and general education, and lots of families that come onto the website looking for things. So I just want to encourage you, if you haven't visited, it's very easy. We go to inclusion.org, inclusion.org, and you click on this map logo. And currently then you come to this welcome page, and look, the Inclusion Collaborative celebration. So you get to this welcome page that lists a lot of different links along the side. So I'm going to take a second to show you what it looks like. If you were to go to cainclusion.org, you get to this page that has the 3 projects that I currently oversee, and you want to click on the logo of California in the middle. So you click on the map, and there's your page. So I'm going to point out right now, Inclusion Works is its own page. So if you go to Inclusion Works, you can download the book, you can download the PowerPoint, you can get all sorts of other information to help make it successful. So back to the PowerPoint. But one of the things that really inspired us, originally it was called Map to Inclusive Childcare. And that was the original federal sort of purpose. And what we have been really inspired by is Norman Kuntz. And many of you may know of Norman. He is an incredible speaker. If you've never heard Norman and you ever see that he's presenting anywhere, go see him. He is so worth it. K-U-N-C is his last name, and he is Canadian. And he and his wife, Emma, have a website called normemma.com. So it's on our website. It's linked right there. And basically, he helped me understand that inclusion was more than participation, that it's really about belonging. And I think I have his quote here in a minute. I guess I have it back there. So here's the quote that really inspires us and keeps us grounded. When inclusion or inclusive practice is fully embraced, we abandon the idea that children have to become normal in order to contribute to the world. Instead, we search for and nourish the gifts that are inherent in all people. We begin to look beyond typical ways of becoming valued members of the community, and in doing so, begin to realize the achievable goal of providing all children with an authentic sense of belonging. So Norman is just really a very inspirational person when he talks about belonging. And one of the things that when I was first sharing this, somebody didn't understand what that meant. Well, what does belonging mean? So I have this activity that I'd like you to do, and some of you will need to find a partner, but I want you to think about this first by yourself, and then we'll have you talk and share with a partner. So I want you to think for a moment of a time in your life when you didn't fit in, when you felt like you were different or separate. If any of you have been a teenager, you had some period during that time, right? I was the tallest girl in 6th grade. I have not grown since. So I was, 5'2" in 6th grade, which was really tall, and then people caught up with me, so it wasn't a big deal. But it felt like a big deal at the time. So, there's things like that happens. So some of you, it may be a painful memory. There may be things that really bring up a lot. Others of you, it may be something very far back in your youth. So I want you to think for that period when you were really feeling disconnected from a group, what were the feelings that you were experiencing? What were those feelings during that time? And then did anything happen, like me, that either made you fit in, other people grew, or helped you become comfortable with your uniqueness, your differentness? And what did others do that supported you? And if no one supported you, what do you wish people had done? So just take a minute and reflect on that and see if you can identify something, and then I'm going to have you talk to a partner. So when you talk to a partner, I'm going to give you permission to not share, because for some people this is too painful. So I want to give you permission. If this is not comfortable for you to share, you can listen to their story, and maybe you can just talk about the conference, what else you'd liked, whatever. But I really want to give you the permission to own your own story and decide whether or not that's something you want to share. On the other hand, I would, appreciate it if you're comfortable with a person at your table to go ahead and share. And if you don't know one another, this is a good time to introduce each other. And those of you watching along at the various places in California, please do the same. If you would bring your attention back, I'd appreciate it. And I want to thank you for having the conversations and taking a chance to talk to one another. If you are comfortable, I don't want the situation, but can anyone just share the feeling that you were experiencing? Anyone? Just holler it out and I'll repeat it so we don't have to have Kathy run around with the mic. Isolated. What else? Anxiety, a lot of anxiety. Embarrassment. Sadness. You start questioning yourself. Is there anything coming in from the... Nope, okay. You are welcome if you want to add. Loneliness. So a lot of aloneness, isolation, a lot of self-questioning, self-doubt. And those of you who know Daniel Siegel's hand model of the brain, we do this in our teaching pyramid work, where we talk about the emotional center of your brain. And that's where you are when all these feelings are happening. That's where you are. And guess where learning takes place? You need this connected to your emotions for learning to take place, but you don't really have access when you're deep in these emotional places. And yet most of you are here. So people have come to a place where people did something that helped them, or they were able to connect with someone. How many of you, when it's something that helped you feel more comfortable, was it connecting with another person? For how many of you did that? Some other person connected, or that's what you wish would have happened, that somebody might have reached out to you and welcomed you in. So we all understand belonging. When we really get down to it, we all understand what it's like to not feel like you're part of the group. And that is not a good feeling. We don't want that feeling to happen for children. And when I talk about Norman Kuntz, he happens to have cerebral palsy, but he talks about inclusion and belonging for high school and how gangs fit that need for a lot of children. And so like I said, he's very inspirational. But I was on a panel with him one time, and I was sharing, because I'm also the parent of 2 children who happen to have some special needs. And I was in the field first, but then had my children. So afterwards, we were sort of debriefing and drinking wine and whining and, things that presenters do. And I was complaining. And he looked at me and he said, "When are you going to stop feeling sorry for your children?" And I was like really taken aback. I said, "What do you mean? I don't feel sorry." He goes, "Yeah, you feel sorry for your children." He said, "You can feel sorry for yourself. This isn't what you signed up for. But your children, this is the only thing they've ever known. This is who they are. You need to start celebrating it." It changed my life. I was able to really start seeing the strengths that my children had, help them start identifying the strengths, and really help them connect to belonging, because they have gifts and strengths that come with some of their uniqueness. And if we can really connect to that, it makes a huge difference. So I just wanted to share that with you and know that Norman has been quite an inspiration to me. One of the things Mary Falvey shared yesterday was a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy. And Norman has written this incredible article called "The Need to Belong, Rediscovering Maslow's Hierarchy of Need." And it's downloadable on his website. And that is in the PowerPoint, the updated PowerPoint. I added this after I saw Mary. I said, "Oh, I've got to share that." So what Norman says is, we understand about Maslow's hierarchy. We provide for children in school their food and shelter and warmth, and security is the next one. We want to make sure that they feel comfortable and secure, which is not always easy for some children. Physical insecurity is a big deal for some of the kids we work with. But then the next thing is belonging and love and connection. And only after that do you get to self-esteem, mastery, achievement, and self-actualization. And just as was pointed out yesterday, but I think he did such a good job of showing, we invert those 2 pieces of Maslow's hierarchy. And we tell children they have to earn their way into belonging. That they have to earn their way into belonging. And as you just all thought about, when you are seeking belonging, that's your priority. That's where your focus is. You're not open to other kinds of information and learning. And that's precisely what happens. Very young children, older children, are constantly trying to figure out belonging. They know when it's conditional. They know that at any minute, mom's going to be called and I'm going to be taken home. They know those things. They know when they're a visitor to a class as opposed to a member. So what we want to think about is, how do we keep belonging as our underlying question? Everything we do should promote belonging for a child. And if you keep that first and foremost in your mind, inclusion follows very well. Because you're always thinking, what can I do that promotes this child's membership in the group, belonging in the group. So inclusion means different things to different people. And I love this picture, and we're going to see several pictures of this little girl, Maya. She was at a community college in California, and here she is being helped to dress up with her peers. And these peers were incredibly important in terms of her inclusion and belonging. So when we talk about inclusion, there is a joint position statement by the Division for Early Childhood and the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And this position statement gives a really clear definition of inclusion and talks about what is needed for inclusion to be successful, which is access, participation, and supports. So here's the definition they use, and forgive me again for reading to you, but I think there are such great words in here. So it says, early childhood inclusion embodies the values, policies, and practices that support the right of every infant and young child and his or her family, regardless of ability. So this is for all, to participate in a broad range of activities and contexts as full members of families, communities, and society. The desired results of inclusive experiences for children with and without disabilities and their families include a sense of belonging and membership, positive social relationships and friendships, and development and learning to reach their full potential. The defining features of inclusion that can be used to identify high-quality early childhood programs and services are access, participation, and supports. That's the definition. Our national groups from the Early Intervention and Early Childhood Special Education Group and from the Early Childhood Educators together have agreed upon. And then they outline in much more detail what those access, participation, and supports are. So I really think it's important for us to hang on to that. And did you notice that they have belonging right in there? So it is something that I think is the heart and soul of it all. So when we think about inclusion, we think of full and active participation so that children are really a part of things. They're not just there. And so that's an important component. And also, it's in anything that was designed for other children. So it's wherever other children would be found. And then if they need support, accommodations, or modifications, those are provided in that setting. So we figure out how to do those things together. So this was touched on by both Whit and Mary in their keynotes, but we can take into consideration the interests, strengths, and needs of all of the children in our care. And one of the things I love most about early childhood people is we already do this, right? That we already have, if you have a group of 2-year-olds who all have the same birthday, they are not all doing the same thing at the same time, right? So we already know that there's a range, that there's some kids who are talking in paragraphs and some kids whose sentences are still a new thing, and everything in between. So we are just asking people to stretch that understanding a little wider when they include children who might come from a very different place. And so we know also that people have good information. Families have incredibly good information. They've been figuring this out for a while by the time you're looking at inclusion into most settings. For infant toddlers, they may not realize that there's an issue with their child. The early care and education provider is often the first person to notice. But even so, the parent may have just been intuitively making accommodations and adaptations, which is why they didn't notice. Well, I didn't know that every child needed to have his head supported for this long. I thought that was just what happened. You know, or he's such a good, quiet baby. So those kinds of things parents are learning to look at. The other part that I love about when we include children is that parents get very good at reading the subtlest cues of their child. And then they get to come into a setting where people aren't as smart. And so the child has to learn to communicate more directly or to get that information. So whereas he can raise his eyebrow and his parent knows he's hungry, he's going to have to make some noise for me to notice. And that's good for him because he can take initiative and he can learn, oh, I can make something. So there's some real benefits to doing this. So here's another picture of Maya. And the kids were digging in the garden. And one of the kids said, because she was being held or sitting in her chair, I don't know which. And this little guy said, her feet work better than her hands. Let her feet get in there. So that was the kids' idea. So they put her feet down in there. Now she had very significant disabilities, including not much vision and not much hearing. But there she was, right in the middle of the dirt with everybody else. And yes, she could feel it with her feet. And that was really an interesting experience. And here she's feeling birdseed with a friend. So one of the things that Kathy McKitka, who many of you know, had said to me a long time ago was that everybody's afraid, but fear fades when fear has a face. And what you'll find, and this is true all the time, is people who may have some hesitation about inclusion of children into a general childcare setting might find, well, I've been including this child all along. Now that they've identified this child, no, of course, you're not moving him, I know him. So it's like once you have a connection and a relationship, people are much more interested in hearing about the whole. So what we find is fear is the biggest barrier to inclusive practice, but it's not fear of the child, it's fear for the child. People are very afraid that a child like Maya, who has some pretty significant needs, won't be able to meet her needs, or they'll do something wrong. And I think that's really important. With knowledge, this fear fades and competence blooms. So one of the things that I had been finding for a long time was that people didn't have a resource, kind of an introduction to inclusion. Something that helped people know how to get started. And the department had been working on this project through MAP for Inclusion Works, and it was really a clearly good place to put a lot of primer in, to put a lot of beginning introductory information. So here's one more picture of Maya. Nothing in life is to be feared, it's only to be understood. And I don't know if you can see, but Maya's having some help with drinking, and the teacher is wiping what has drooled a little, and this child has a baby doll, and she's imitating and doing the exact same thing. She's got the little towel and is trying to do that. So again, that real connection and empathy, because she's just part of the group. So Inclusion Works is, just think of it as a real good introduction to inclusion. How many of you have seen the book before? A few. So it's like all good Department of Education, early education and support division materials. It's downloadable on the website. It's also, I uploaded the whole thing into Edmodo if you want to download it. But it's got beautiful pictures, so you can also purchase it for like 20 bucks. I don't know, it's not very expensive. And one of the things that it does is it really gives some good information that can be used both by educators, general educators and special educators, all ages. It's kind of a birth through age 8 or 9 resource. So, well, it says 12 up there, what do I know? And there's a whole resource page in the back, and we try to keep that resource page up to date with the links on the Inclusion Works page at the Map to Inclusion and Belonging. So basically, what I'd like to do is, if we can get people into about 10 tables, I'm going to let you have a book to look at. But you have to move forward so that you can have a book to look at, and then I'll collect them back at the end. So, thank you, Carolyn. I'm going to keep one for. So, one of the things, so again, you're going to have to collapse yourselves into some more tables if you want to share. One of the things that before I ever wrote books, and I was the primary author on this, I didn't always read the introduction. So I'm here to tell you, read the introductions. That's very important. I was really excited about this. Then there are these chapters and appendices. So there's a few going around, and I do have this one more. See? You're welcome. It's bent, but okay. So before I jump ahead, I know we can do questions at the end. Are there any questions about the belonging piece or some of those Norman and his work? No questions. Okay. So now that we have you in tables, how many of you have your primary background in early intervention or special education? Please raise your hand. So that's your primary background, okay? How many of you is your primary background in early care and education? Okay. How many of you are school age involved? More kindergarten, first, okay? And then how about infant toddler, infant toddler, and preschool? Okay, so we have quite a mix of people in the room. That's great. As I said, this book can be used by anyone, and it is intended really to help people walk through how to make a program really inclusive. So if you have the teaching collaborative partners, or if you are a group out there by yourself. So the introduction really sets the tone of the book, and it defines things. So for example, we use the term family as though everybody means the same thing, right? So I do an activity sometimes where I have people list all the members of their family, and then we start asking, did anybody list people who weren't related by blood or marriage? And then somebody else, or adoption, and people were raised. Did anybody list pets, and people, did anybody list members of their family who were now deceased? And people, you didn't tell me I could list that. Well, it's who you define as your family, right? And then I say, well, what if you had to make an important decision? Would the list change? Is that who you turn to when you have to make an important decision? Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's very different. And yet, when we have a meeting, an IEP meeting, an IFSP meeting, early Head Start planning session, we say, bring your family, right? We don't really know who they mean. Who do they think of? So we define family as anyone who is the primary person with the child. But I think it's important to keep thinking, and who are those people that the family defines as family, and that the family looks to for decision making and support, because we don't always think about that. And inclusion starts in the family. So when you talk about belonging, as a home visitor in an early intervention program, I used to walk in and families would say, we can't go over to my in-laws' house anymore because she cries the whole time we're there, and grandma's afraid to hold her. Her tube gets in the way, she has a trach or whatever it is. And that's belonging. That's where you start. We have to support children to belong in their families, to help reduce that fear, to help make that happen. Or children who are only comfortable in one room of the house. They need to have access to the rest of the house so that they have that belonging. So it's interesting when you start thinking about belonging, it really begins very, very early. So chapter 1 provides kind of a rationale for inclusive care, because we still have to do that somehow. But basically, belonging is the key. Everyone benefits. Everyone benefits. And I think that's an important piece to hang on to, that teachers in the early care and education world, in the general child care world, will say, wow, I can use so many of the strategies that I used by including that child with disabilities with all the children. I'm a better teacher. So you hear that quite a bit. Parents of other children, children who do not have disabilities, will also find that, they're afraid because it could be me. Disability is the only club that anybody can join at any time. That's what makes it so frightening. So once people understand, oh, okay, I have a barrier because I really am afraid that this could be me, and how would I feel? That really can help turn them around. So we also, whenever I do trainings on inclusion, the first thing that people say they want is they want to know everything about disability. They want to know specific disabilities and all about disabilities. And I'm here to tell you that I've been doing this for a lot of years, and there are still children that I meet that I've never heard of their disability. And there's children that I meet that have a very familiar disability who defy any of my preconceived ideas. And so really, it's not about the disability. It's about the individual child. And if you can get to know who is this child, what is this child's strengths and gifts, what are this child's needs, and what do they need from me to accomplish the next logical step. That's all pretty much you need to know. So really in this we talk about when a family says my child has fill in the blank. My child has cerebral palsy. My child has Down syndrome. My child has autism. The question that a provider would ask back is, and how does that affect his development? Because if you can find out, so how does that affect his development? Then you can learn, well, my child has cerebral palsy. He walks and he falls down sometimes. It affects his speech. Well, my child has cerebral palsy and he uses a wheelchair and he speaks quite well. And everything in between. So you get that specific information and it gives suggested questions that can be asked to help you really get at the knowledge for the individual child. And again, I find this is something that any of us, early childhood special educator or early educator, are good at. We're good at learning about children. So one of the things that I often will do is say, you know, you're going to get a new kid in your class next Monday. When you come start, is today Friday? I don't even know what date it is. So Monday, you have a new child starting in your class, and she's 2.5, and she is adorable. She is not got a lot of words, but she's really communicative with her body. She walks okay, but is a little unstable on her feet. And she just loves playing with everybody and everything. So you get a kind of a picture of a child, and most people would have ideas of what they would be doing to help her be successful in their classroom. And then I say, oh, by the way, she has Down syndrome. And I will get people say, oh, I don't know anything about Down syndrome. I just don't know. And you think you knew a whole bunch before I said that last part. You had all sorts of ideas. You've got to hang on to those ideas. They're the same ideas, that same information. So that's what we really want to get people grounded in. What you know about children, you can use with all children. You just have to be openly curious. Tell me more about how she does that. What else does she like? How does she work? You know, how does she communicate if her words aren't there? You would ask that if you had another child who didn't speak English or another child who was delayed in their language. So that's the piece for chapter 1. The message that I got long ago and that I think I love the most about the program for infant toddler care is that all children are competent and vulnerable. That all infants especially are competent and vulnerable. They can communicate, but they need us to meet their needs. And that message is so wonderful to think of for children with disabilities, because my first work was with children with very significant multiple disabilities, and there was nothing more fun than helping people understand all the things this child was communicating, even if it was a very untraditional way. And infants and toddlers don't have to raise their hands and say, excuse me, would you please change my diaper now? Hello, I would like to eat. They don't have to do that. They communicate through their behavior. And so, oops, I thought I had it next. Looking at all children can communicate. All children are competent to let us know what they need. We just have to be paying attention. So that's another message that we really try to have come through in this book. Chapter 2 compares high quality child care with inclusive child care and says, what's the difference? There isn't any. It's the most fun part. Really, quality is what it takes. If you're trying to provide inclusive care and you don't have a quality program, the kids who have special needs are not going to let you get away with it. That's the truth. And that's true all the way up the age span. And the programs that are providing inclusive practice can do a better job of promoting that and explaining that so that it's an open piece to all families. And then in chapter 3, we go over some of the research things that have shown what really supports inclusion. So vision, having a vision and having champions, having people that really believe in it help quite a bit. And this, my husband, who sometimes trains with me, says this is his favorite piece, his favorite quote out of the whole book, is that success happens child by child, day by day. That's how you figure out if it's working, child by child and day by day. So here's why quality matters. Children with special needs and behavior challenges are like our canaries in the coal mine. So if you haven't been coal mining lately, which most Californians have not, when you dig for coal in the ground, the gases that come out of the coal are heavier than oxygen. And at some point, the oxygen gets pushed out of the small enclosure, and you don't have enough oxygen to stay awake. You fall asleep and die. This is not a good thing if you are a miner. So back in the day when they couldn't test this, they would use canaries. And they would take canaries because canaries needed a higher percentage of oxygen. And when the canaries would fall off the perch, they would know it's time to hightail it out of there. The oxygen isn't high enough. And I'm sure they did little canary CPR and everybody was fine at the top. They just had not had enough oxygen. So I don't want anybody thinking we're sacrificing the canaries. But what I have found over and over and over again is someone says, I'm just not able to include this child. He just doesn't, listen. He's all over the place. And you walk into the classroom and you think, okay, it's not him. There are some quality issues going on. There's not clear purposes in what you're doing. The transitions are chaotic. The other kids are coping, but this child doesn't have those resources. So you're hearing from this child, this isn't working for me. And that's why I think I've heard a speaker once that said when he was a teacher in high school and he included a child who had very significant disabilities, he said, I could always tell when I was getting too much droning because she'd get up and walk out of the room. And he said it was always my clue to say, oh, okay, got it. I'll come back now. Because she just wouldn't put up with it. And I think that's what we have to realize, that it's the early warning signs. It's not that the child can't be included, it's that perhaps there may be quality issues that need to be addressed first. So that's the piece that we can look at. We need to look at the environment, the physical environment, the sensory environment, and the emotional environment. Does this child feel like they belong? Do they feel like a visitor? That's going to have a big impact on if they are really, how their actions are. The curriculum routines, the adult-child interactions. And also, we do know that some children who have a disability may perceive the world differently. So they may truly not get it when something is said until they've been given a concrete example. So there's a video that I show, and in it, this little girl with Down syndrome is being told, have a seat, have a seat, have a seat. And finally, somebody puts her bottom in the chair, and she sits down. And I think have a seat must not have meant anything to her. But we'll do that. We'll say the same thing over and over again. So sometimes we have to just understand what's going to be understood and are they perceiving. And remember, behavior is communication, even from adults. Right? So you guys are having very good attention. I have no idea what they're doing on the other end of that, but I'm assuming that they have some kind of good attention. And so if we remember, what would the balloon next to their head be saying? If something could say there. And what if we assumed good intention? So we assume that when he falls down crying, the balloon over his head says, I just wanted another turn with that toy. Oh my gosh, I've been there. I've wanted another turn with that toy. So, really thinking about what's the child's good idea behind that and what is the behavior communicating. Sometimes when we can give voice to that, that can really make a big difference. So chapter 4 of the book talks about how you can identify and find help for children and gives some information about talking with parents when you're the one, as an early care and education professional, who notices that there may be something different. And I think those are the hardest conversations anybody ever has to have. And I think it's important that we really, again, take time to learn what are some sensitive ways to do that. We have a whole PowerPoint session, training PowerPoint, and article about that on the MAP website that I will show you in a minute. And it also talks about the systems, because one of the other things that's so confusing and yet wonderful is that there are multiple systems that are available for children who have different kinds of disabilities. So if you know about the systems, sometimes people will say, well, I have to see the doctor before I make a referral to the early intervention or the special education program, when in fact those are different systems with somewhat different reasons. Doctors are looking for diagnoses and treatment, and that can take longer. Early intervention and special education are looking for eligibility, and they can work even if there's not a clear reason or diagnosis. Those two things can be referred at the same time. So a lot of times, you know, there's a lot of delays when in fact those systems work separately enough that they can be happening at the same time. So there's information about those links. And then chapter 5 really outlines how do you make the partnerships for this to be successful? How do you really see the families as essential partners and really understand and respect what they have to offer? And then if you're an early care and education professional, how do you work with the specialists that may come in and out of your program? And if you're a specialist, how do you work with the early care and education professionals? And so there's a list of questions and some things to think about, because what we find is there's a lot of mystery instead of mastery. I loved that yesterday, that people don't understand what each other does. So, you know, I've had a specialist, and when I say specialist, I'm talking about special educator or early interventionist, come into a program for the hour that they have and want to change the whole schedule because of what they're doing in that moment, when the early care and education person has spent months perfecting their schedule just to meet the needs of the children. So by not understanding that these things were choices, this schedule had meaning, and by the early care and education person not understanding these are the kinds of activities that the specialist wants to support, they might be at a miss, you know, so they don't understand one another. So really looking at how you can ask for those information. And then probably the heart of the book comes in chapter 6. And so in chapter 6, it outlines things that were discovered through the Early Childhood Research Institute on Inclusion. And it talks about the most common modifications that were made by early care and education professionals. So yesterday, if you were in the session Mary Falvey did, she talked about the difference between adaptations and modifications, and I thought that was very, very helpful. That an adaptation is when you just don't change the basic structure of something, but you change something that helps the child have access to it. So more time to complete a task would be an adaptation. And a modification is when you actually change the internal, you know, kind of goals or purpose. And so I would say that some of these are a mix, now that I got that really clear definition. So, and what's interesting is this is also the order in which they did focus groups and had teachers just talk about what they had done to successfully include children. And this was the order in which they talked about things that were in fact successful. The number one thing was environmental support. That is not as complicated as it sounds. It's just actually altering physical, social, or temporal environment to promote participation, engagement, and learning. So it was simple things like, for a child that has a vision issue, keeping the materials in the same place every time. That's the environmental support modification. So it wasn't huge things, these were smaller things. Materials adaptation, figuring out how to use, you know, putting a grip around crayons so a child can hold them. Again, very simple materials. Activity simplification. So this is something, again, that I think a lot of early childhood special educators could support our colleagues in early care and education to understand that this task that seems really simple to you, like here's a piece of paper, cut it out, has all these steps, and that some children really need all the pieces broken down, right? And once we understand what are all the pieces to it, it becomes much easier to teach. Then the fourth one is using child preferences, figuring out what children already like to do so that you can encourage and entice them to do that. I know that sounds very basic, but there are so many times as a specialist that I would walk in and want to work on something with the child, and I never bothered to figure out if they cared to work on it with me. You know, I went in with my little agenda, and I wanted to move right to, let's practice this. Whereas if I would have gotten to know that if I only had had Thomas the Tank Engine, we would have had a lot more success, you know, that was going to be more interesting than whatever the other toy that they were using. Special equipment. Now this is one that always freaks people out because they think special equipment means expensive or specialized, but sometimes the adaptive devices can be very simple and can include being open to using things that you might otherwise not try. So a child's hearing aid is an adapted device. So if you've got a child with a hearing aid, you better learn how to put it back on, how to do the battery, and what to do when they bury it in the sand, because they will. And then adult support. What I love about this is adult support is the sixth thing. But we heard yesterday from Mary, and we still hear, everybody thinks what you need is a person. This child to be included needs a person, a one-on-one person. That is not true. And even in this adult support, it is not a one-on-one person. Sometimes the adult is the person who can help that child find access or get into things. Peer support is also, I think, an underused piece, but as I showed you in some of those pictures with Maya, it was the peer support, it was the kids who figured out some of the things more quickly than the adults. So really tuning in and even saying to children, how can we help him be successful? And we talked about this in some program, some table yesterday, with children with challenging behavior. You can have a child whose behavior is challenging, which is not a secret. Everybody knows this child's behavior is challenging, and you can really promote belonging by saying, oh, he is working so hard to use his words. How can we help him? What can we all do? And really treating it as, oh, I know, when he asks for something, I'm going to give it to him. You know, the kids will come up with those kinds of things. And in this case, the story we use in here is of a little girl who had very immature play skills. She was really not interacting in any kind of more depth with her pretend play, but she loved this doll. She would just carry a doll around. So they paired her with a little girl who was much more complex in her play with dolls, and pretty soon the two of them, she would really start paying attention and started expanding her play with the doll. So, and last but not least is invisible support. So any of you who are familiar with the book, Building Blocks, they have the same activity, because this is all from the same research, and they use icons for each of these, and their icon for invisible support is a little ghost. So it always makes me smile. But anyway, the invisible support is when you just do naturally occurring events so that inclusion happens more automatically. One of the easiest ones that they talk about is if you're, stirring like something that you're cooking, and you let the child who might have motor issues stir early when it's still soupy and not when it's really hard to stir at the end. That would be invisible support. You just kind of know that's what's going to happen. So typically what I do when I do this training for a longer period of time, and everybody has the books, is I ask everybody to take one of those stories, because they're long case studies, and read them and see what kinds of ideas they can cull from the ideas. So in those 8 modifications, we have 9 stories of adaptations and ways that it worked. And those case studies are all real. They all came from real places, and they have birth through age 8 or 9. Oh, I think 12. I think we do have 12 in there. So it just is to kind of give you ways to picture it, to see how it works. So what I'd like to do instead of that is I'd like to give you some time to look in the book in any of those chapters and see what is something that stands out to you. And if you want to look more directly at one of these are the page numbers on here. And if you just want to look at, like some of you were really nodding your head about the working with specialists and working as specialists with early care and education providers, you might want to look in chapter 5 and look up that. So take a minute, and again, at those of you watching on at home, it's not at home, but at the other offices, hopefully somebody has downloaded the book and you can look at it, or you can talk amongst yourselves about inclusion. So I'm going to give you about 5 or 7 minutes to work at your tables with the book. And if you don't have a book, you can come join a friend. Hopefully you got a chance to do some looking through and getting some ideas and finding some things. And Kathy is here she has the microphone because now we're going to be sharing. And those people who are watching from other places are also invited to send in some sharing. So who would like to start? What somebody wants to say, you found something in the book, or you have a comment, or... There we go, someone on this side. Thank you so much.
So we really like the idea of the buddy system, and we do it. We just think that one of our long-term goals was to be able to create like a buddy training, in order to really get the families, the typically developing kids that are in our program, to be excited about this idea and what it will bring to them, because just like you said, there's a lot of this idea like, what is this going to mean for my kid, and I don't know about that, or maybe my kid will hurt your kid, and so I don't want them interacting, and how it can be positive for everyone. But we think that more individualized kind of opportunity to have other kids pair up with our kids is great.
So there's, I think that's really good to be more intentional about how we set children up for success in buddying. And I will add to the Edmodo folder something that we use in the teaching pyramid in Cephal on buddying that has some really nice guidelines for ways to try buddying. There's also more information about preparing peer partners, which was done through Phil Strain's program. They've done a lot of work with helping peer partners know ways to support other children. And so we have some information about that in that same handout. And I believe there's something in there. So yes, absolutely, it's a great idea. And I think one of the keys for me is that it has to be mutual, that one of the things that we forget is that all children need to be helpers and can be seen as teaching each other things. So I think that's great to be thinking about. Somebody else? What? Okay, here we go.
I actually feel very lucky that I get to do both, work in the classroom with infant 0 to 5, as well as teach at night at a community college. And I think this is a fantastic book. I'm promoting it for Linda.
Not for me, the department. I don't make any money off of it.
I tell my staff, when you're in the classroom, when you're working directly with children, one of the things I always tell them, your environment is your third teacher. So you really need to look at your environment and how could you make it work for all children. And then with my students, I always say, well, you know what? I don't have any children in my classroom that are special needs. I'm like, what does that really mean to you? So you're telling me that in your lifetime, you will never run across anyone with special needs. And if you do, let's turn the scenario around. If you do, how would you support this person? How would you support the rest of the children in your classroom? Like you say, there's a sense of belonging, and all children need to feel that way. How do I use this book? I do not want to overwhelm the students because they have lots of classes, the textbook. So I use this as a supplement. I sprinkle in 45 minutes a night and say, you know what? Let's talk about this a little bit. Let's talk about inclusion a little bit. And then go home and give me a good 2 or 3 pages reflection and email me. Share your thoughts. What do you think? That's how I use this book.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Somebody else. Aha. You have somebody from there. Oh, great. You have to have a microphone too. I know, that's good. Yes, okay, so here comes from our participants virtually.
Okay. One of the virtual participants said, one of our participants really likes ensuring that children with special needs is sometimes the helper and not always the one being helped.
Yes, yes, very important, very important. They need to be seen, again, as contributing members of the classroom. And then somebody had something right there.
So I have this book at home, but I guess I must not have read it in
People don't
detail.
open books. We get them at conferences. I understand that. That's why I have you open it here.
Yes, but I wanted to share with you my experience with obtaining adult support, because talking to my partner here, I realized that we have the same issues at work. I don't have any management support, and I think it's due to ignorance about children with special needs. And we have quite a lot of them. I work at a homeless shelter, and we have quite a lot of children with what I feel is unidentified special needs. And these children already feel a lot of trauma. Mm-hmm. And they come into our center very angry and very just very physically abusive. Yeah, because probably that's how they've been treated. So I have a child in my center now, who I feel really I've been pushing his parent to have him assessed in the district, because I'm having a difficult time, me and my staff handling him. I'm sorry to say I've done everything that I can to be I'm really patient with him. I treat him with kindness and respect, very accepting. I'm very loving to him. But I think he's just been through a lot, and I think that he also may have issues that are not, entirely his fault. So I've had teachers who had to leave, who quit because they said that they're not getting the training, to help these children, and I don't have the support from my management. So I was looking at this story in 6B, and it talks about the parent contract. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something that I'll try with this boy's parent, because her I don't want to say excuse, but she has to support her family. She has to work, so she never has any time to go to the district. Mm-hmm. Many times I made appointments for her. I've held her hand to do it, and then she would not show up. So I feel like, and I can't not accept him, but I feel like it's endangering the other children. It's endangering myself. And I have teachers who are just quitting.
So this is unfortunately a common issue, is that oftentimes we get a child and we feel kind of at a loss because the child doesn't have identified disability, so there's not a team already. The child may or may not qualify for additional support. And I think, and you have the extra issues of the homelessness and the strains that the family's under. So I think it's very complex. And I think that certainly you use every strategy that you have, and then you find some other support, whether if it's not your own, that's the community of practice. You might find some people here who could think with you and reflect with you so that you can come up with a plan. It is very, very challenging. But I think also with children who have experienced trauma, they still need a real foundational sense of community and belonging. And so sometimes our settings are the island of sanity for them. And that can be the place where there's consistency and there's routine and there's those sorts of things and expectations and boundaries and limitations that are not punitive but are helpful. So, it's a lot of work. So I understand. You could use some help. Uh-oh. Wait, you're talking and we have to have the microphone. Thank you.
Because at home they can't hear you.
I just think that don't give up hope because all of us have been in that place of, oh my gosh, only if this parent would just listen to me. I think we all been in that place, and I think it's about that child at that moment. I think forget about the administrator because it's all about time and money. We know that. So instead of, think of what we cannot do, think what can I do? What more can I do? What more can my staff do? So I say don't give up hope. You've done a lot. And I think you more than you know. So sometimes you might just want to write down what have I done and what have not I have not tried.
So I do want to hear from a couple other people. I'm going to go back to the MAP page and show you under MAP training PowerPoints. There are a number of PowerPoints, including this one, the Inclusion Works. But we also have talking with parents when you have concerns about a child in your care. And there is the PowerPoint in Spanish, Chinese, and English. There's also participant handouts. There's trainer notes that give you under each slide some ideas of ways to share it. And then there's an article that was written by Janet Gonzalez-Mena and myself about talking with parents. And we take two situations, one where the parent agrees with you and one where the parent doesn't, and talk about how you support both of those things. Because parents aren't going to always agree with you, and parents have their own experience and their own rationale. So one of the things that happens quite often is if only that parent, I hear that a lot, if only the parent would. And commonly what's said at that point is that and I'm not saying this about you, I'm just now saying it generally, but people will say that parent's in denial. Have you ever heard that or said it? So that parent's in denial is a common phrase, and usually it's accompanied by if only the parent would do what I told them, if only they'd follow through, if only. And you know who's in denial? The early educators, or the specialists, because whenever we say if only, we want the problem to go away. If the parent would do what I said, all my problems would go away. That's denial, because that's not going to happen, even if they get help. So we have to stop and say, wait a minute. I'm the one that's not listening. I'm the one that's pushing. I'm the one that's saying it's my, what can I do? So we have to stop and realize parents are taking in information, making decisions based on a lot of different things. So some parents are not going to be ready to listen to you at that moment, and they may have lots and lots of valid reasons. And they may have reasons that may be valid to them and not to you. But it's their child, so we have to still, unless it's a abuse or medical neglect issue, we really have to honor their timelines. And that's the hardest part, is that by the time a parent kind of agrees with you, then they're going to say, why didn't you do this earlier? And you're like, okay, we were trying. But I think it's important, and I guess I really know that if Helen Keller's mother wouldn't have been in denial, we would have lost a lot of things. We need people who believe in the competence of their children, and sometimes they just want to know that we believe in that competence too, even if they need extra special help. So that was a little soapbox I didn't expect. Somebody else share from this table. Here you go.
Our group here said that we talked about some of the case studies that they've done, and as a teacher, right now I'm working as a disability specialist, but I was a director for 34 years. And over the years, I just started putting children's names under each one of those. And I thought, I could have looked this up and saved myself a lot of trouble. But sitting here at the beginning of your discussion, you hit the nail on the head for me, and it almost knocked me out of my chair, because you said stop feeling sorry for them. And my granddaughter's Downs, and she's 14, and no one told me that when she was a year old. And even working in this field, no one has told me to stop. And I can think back now of all the times, and I shared at the table how when she was born, my daughter-in-law would get upset when somebody would notice, because if you didn't notice, it would go away. And we became very angry, and I think it rubbed off on all of us that, how dare you notice? It almost went away. And so we as educators have to remember parents are feeling that way, and you're validating something they don't want to hear. It's not as much denial as anger. And as much as we loved Maddie, we were angry that it happened instead of embracing who she is. And she is one of the most wonderful people I've ever had the pleasure to meet. But I found her in several of these scenarios. And I have a Bobby and a Sally and a Johnny that fit in these.
Yeah.
And I know that I'm going to be reading this book quite often now. And I thank you for that.
Thank you. And you'll have to thank Norman for that little piece, because it really can change. And I think that's one of the hardest pieces for me in a lot of the early intervention work around autism is it is about curing. And at some point, we're going to have to start celebrating who they are and who people are. So I think it's a tough message out there. And it happens at different ages. I don't think parents can hear it early sometimes, but I think it's good to say, and she's got some wonderful qualities, and what can we do to support her to be the best that she can be. So, thank you. Oh, something there. I know, we get listening.
So I have two questions or comments. One comment is about the representative from the homeless the shelter program, and it's she thinks you have a very valid point, because you're recognizing your needs and limitations, and that's why we're a team. And so I'm going to add one more thing, because I work for the Inclusion Collaborative. Are you in San Jose? Okay, we have a coaching. We can send out a coach to help you with that. So in San Jose, I'm going to talk
Santa
about the
Clara.
in Santa Clara County at the Inclusion Collaborative. We do a couple of things. So one thing that we really strongly recommend programs to do is to call the WARM line, and I'm the WARM line, so we can help you with some visual supports maybe, and think about some other ideas. A lot of them from CCEFL and from the Map to Inclusion and other places. And then we also have a free coaching program where we can send out an inclusion specialist to come out and observe your program and say, oh, I see what you're doing here, and maybe give you some ideas for how to tweak it. It's wonderful. So please give us a call.
Yay.
So yay for the Inclusion Collaborative. Not that I'm doing an advertisement or anything.
It's okay. I'm gonna give you one more resource on the Map to Inclusion and Belonging, and that's our county-specific resources. So if you look at the county-specific resources, so in case you're not in Santa Clara County, but let's just look at Santa Clara County. You can either click on the county itself, or you can click over here. But if you click on the county itself, you will get resources around inclusion, the county organizations in each county, so the Regional Center, the Family Resource Center, the SELPA, the Special Ed Local Plan Area, the Child Care Resource and Referral, the Local Child Care Planning Council, the First Five, the Office of Education, and the Early Head Start and Head Start. You then also can find inclusion and behavior resources. Look at there, the Inclusion Collaborative. And eventually we're going to be having some of our partner sites that we are working with across the county. So if you are from a different county, then that way you can find some resources in this region. If you are from a county and you find an inaccurate resource, you just says right here, send updated or missing information to map@wested.org and we'll update it. So I just want to be sure everybody knows about those great resources.
I have one more comment.
One more,
here,
okay.
when you're
Boy,
ready.
the virtual,
Yes.
they're in the
so,
house.
One of the questions was, could you discuss the adult support highlight from Chapter 6 a little further?
So there's 2 examples of adult support in there, and they're very different. So I definitely include people to read them. One that she was talking about has a child that has some very challenging behavior and how they worked. And this, again, these are real situations where the parent had not followed through on a referral. And so they did a parent contract where they said, here's what we'd like from you, here's what we will do. And it was a together so that they could continue to maintain him in the program. They then implemented some very specific visual pieces that were very successful for him. And over time, as they saw the changes, the foster parent, who was his grandmother, I believe, ended up going ahead and following through with the district. The other one was a program where they had inclusion program with different adults and 3 different children who had very different needs. And it talks about how one of the children wouldn't nap. I'm sure that never happens. And he happened to be a child that the group was learning sign language so they could communicate with a child who had hearing loss. And he picked up on the sign language because he wasn't napping. So then that ended up being this wonderful resource for everybody. So it's a fascinating story, that one. So I would encourage you to read it, but the adult support isn't a Velcro aid, as they say. It's really, how does the adult support the child to be successful, and how do we make sure that we're promoting belonging? So if somebody asks something, we direct them back to the child. It looks like he wants to do this, instead of us answering for them, if you are the aid. Okay? So I want to finish up by this wonderful quote, which you all have embraced as the piece, but I really think this is the way we're going to make a difference, is being the change, is thinking differently about embracing children's personalities, quirks, gifts, challenges. It's what makes them who they are. And one of the things Norman Kuntz says is, he goes, people often ask me if I could get rid of my cerebral palsy, would I do it? And he says, it's really surprising for people to hear, but I wouldn't. I wouldn't get rid of it because cerebral palsy is part of my history. It's what made me who I am. So without cerebral palsy, I wouldn't be me. So that's, again, a very interesting perspective. And please visit the MAP website. Take the survey.